Sangye chedan choki chonamla chanjo pardo dani kyapsunche Sage jinzo gibe chonamki Dola penjira sangye ndo parasho Sangye chedan choki chonamla chanjo pardo dani kyapsunche Sage jinzo gibe chonamki Dola penjira sangye ndo parasho Sangye chedan sogi chonam la chanchu pardo dani kyapsun Tage jinzo gibe chonam ki Rola penjire sangye ndo parasho Simjen tamche dewa tan dewe gyu tan dembara gyu Simjen tamche dungal tan dungal gi gyu tan tawara gyu Simjen tamche dungal mebe dewa tan mindal vara gyu Simjen damje nyirin chadan nidan da tanyamlan nebara gyurji Simjen damje dewa devi gyudan dembara gyurji Simjen damje dungaldan dungal gi gyudan tawara Simjen damje dungal mebe dewa dan mindavar Simjen damje nyirin chadan nidan da tanyamlan nebara gyurji Simjen damje dewa Dewe gyudan dembara gyurji semjen damje dungal ge gyudan tawara gyurji semjen dam dungal mebe dewa dam mendawar semjen damje nyirin chadan nidan da tanyamlan nebara gyurji semjen damje dewa dewe gyudan dembara gyurji semjen damje dungal ge gyudan tawara gyurji semjen dam Tungal mebe dewa dam mindavar Simjen damje nyirin chadan nidan da tanyamlan nebara gyurji Sajbi oji Chuji me do odam Rirolin Nyele yembandi Songe jindu Medembu waye Dogenanda Jela echeparajo Yedam guru rana mendala ataya.
Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha by the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha by the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha by the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This ground spread with incense, adorned with strewn flowers, Mount Meru, the 4 continents, and the sun and the moon. I imagine as a Buddha land, and by offering it to you, may all living beings enjoy this pure land. Thus, meeting the teaching of the peerless teacher is due to the spiritual mentor's kindness. I dedicate this virtue for all living beings to be cared for by excellent spiritual friends. Yadam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryata Yami.
Kange tujingi zunga tawa tamze pambe chire tambe chuni tunze ve kodam te la cha za lo. Ya da kunung de da kazanga mani juju na jin chanchu gi sem gi zingwa de pe misibu ke chimbo re sirwa. Chue nyen she de chue sun romando de so kunung la ra le bare. Kunung ya wo chi che eni 다 그산에 라바나진 가서 툭툭지 랑 진진의 견도다 진 진진의 연된다네 랑 진진 dom과다 빼미스베 개침보라 랑 진진 마돔나 장동 망보지 렘바이나 아니 네바 망보지 요에 고르 마도 티 야가지게 말에 랑 진진 돔 tum나더니 발절 자동 팔장 구구 말에 장동래나 랑 진진 돔이나 랑 진진 추충다이나 되니 자동지지 발전 고구 말에 순구하래 여름 순구다 란친진 dom나 자동지지 발전 고구 말에지 당마저 줄라 또또서 같이 쳐고 dom발랭이야 거대 때미스베 개침보래 dom발랭이야가 숭야를 막하는데니 쳐서게 믿어
And so, as we've discussed earlier, we've said that motivation is extremely important. And arousing and holding the perfect motivation of bodhicitta is really what is indispensable. And when it comes to whatever dharma we may be learning, we may be listening to, whether it really becomes a spiritual practice or not, really relies on whether we are holding the proper motivation or not. And so thus we need to hold the proper motivation as best as we can, really embracing and imbuing our minds with the mind of altruism, the mind of bodhicitta. And at the same time, holding in our minds the understanding of the faults of a self-cherishing attitude, a selfish and self-cherishing attitude, and seeing the qualities, and rather focusing our concern and care on others. And so it's really our own self-cherishing attitude that we need to get in control, that we really need to tamp down and have under control. Because if we don't have this under control and we just let this run free, this big ego and this selfishness and self-centeredness just run free, even if we do take up the vows, we'll be committing many misdeeds, many mistakes. And so that's not favorable. That is not the situation that we want to be in. And so therefore, what the actual precepts that are to be observed is we don't have to focus so much on those if we have already rid ourselves of self-clinging. It's the self-clinging that really precedes and pervades all of these trainings, all the precepts of the vows. And His Holiness himself is always saying that the number one thing that we need to do in order to be holding all of those vows in place and really observing them is to have any attitude of self-centeredness and self-cherishing under control, or we should say tamped down, or really diminished to the best of our ability. That's what the practice and holding the vows comes down to. It's not whether we have formally taken them or not taken them.
란진진라 견들다네 다 진진진기 연del다네 샘께 세드가라 신데 바지 제가 샘지라 sigorwa kanji jindenjene ani sangi kopang roya ge samlojila semke sigor dendi semjila tin digala ta di gyula makina suji gyule kebar majibe ina khane laba samgi semke ngone chago mare tin digala gyundu ta kaza tubtub jindenjela ta chik jenla pentayala samtangwa de pemisibe kechembure jaza nangba sangi chede tawada joba ngire joba chewa meba tawa tenjung singindi chagore
The chopa tsewa meba.
joba chewa meba joba chewa meba seyade jaza nije kunel nabi janjugi semde joba chewa mebi joba ta ngone de de chadiore oda di dang tawa tenjung tengi zungdunde ne nyamsu malana teni hoya guni yamare oda teni nikala gyundu kan shebade chik ngazo shichu mare ndupchere nduba nyamlen chogade pe misib ke chemore samlu tang kwaya tangbo thebaje thebetondala sambatang samlu o susulola o diresha ndi mason drosamindu samlu bordo samlu tane teni ti yang tapaji shene dige phengyo mare tadung ngazo komditen gore pe bezem je moga bordo tabe ngamngam shushu yong bordo tabe 가르스고래 저는 인용화 맡은 버도 딱 곰디된 거라 텔로 곰시고라 곰시디가라 간지 시비 던데라 곰디테니 야니양도 곰디테네 니베 주민 인용화 턴턴 버도 삼당 거야 어다 됐은 거 제자 되바 되비시랍 삼베시랍 곰베시랍 저기 ngamangamali chimachiba zabru saru chagora zaban chagora saran chagora tamisu ke chembre
And so where we left off last in our study of the text, we left off speaking about some very, very crucial points of emphasis. And that is, again, understanding self-centeredness, seeing the faults in it, really corralling it, getting it under control, while at the same time, seeing the goodness in our work out there in the world that is focused on care for others, serving our community, caring about the benefit of all sentient beings, and applying ourselves to that rather than self-centeredness. We speak about arousing bodhicitta, or arousing the enlightened mind. And what this means is that within one's mind, within one's thoughts, one has these completely and sincerely turned to benefit others, that one's own life energies are for the purpose of benefiting others. To really have that thought and feeling aroused in your mind, arise in your mind. This is what it means to arouse bodhicitta, or arouse the perfect motivation, or arouse the mind of enlightenment. That thought to benefit others must be there. And so if we do have the mind of bodhicitta arisen in our mind, what this means is we're always thinking about benefiting others. This is what it means to arouse bodhicitta. And if this doesn't arise in your mind stream, meaning you don't have the sincere wish and desire to be focused on benefiting others, if you only say the words, well, basically, that doesn't cut it. That is not arousing bodhicitta. So we must always, on an ongoing basis, think about the benefit of others. When it comes to the teachings and the practice of the Buddha Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, these can be categorized in two broad categories of the view or the philosophy, and then the actions of the path. And the view is a view of understanding the interdependent arising of things. That's the view. And then the conduct is to be non-harming. It is a peaceful conduct of non-harming. And so actually these two come together because actually the activities or the conduct of Buddhism, it starts with compassion. And through compassion, we pick up and learn this attitude of concern that would never harm another. And so therefore, the path is actually very much so in place to accomplish the conduct. And so the path isn't just about holding the view. Buddhist practice is really something to practice, but it must be together with bodhicitta, and also both view and conduct together. So a view of the true underlying nature, and then this compassion that would never harm. If we don't have those in an indivisible union, then actually all of the factors that should be there are incomplete. So we should always, on an ongoing basis, not just speak about it or learn about it, but we must actually practice it. So there's a process here. Yes, there's a threefold process. We need to learn. So we need to take in the information. And then we need to process that information through self-reflection and thinking about it. Oh, and then we need to actually assimilate that which we have come to learn, understand personally from our own self-reflection. So in that middle process of self-reflection, we're analyzing what we heard. Oh, you know, was it like this or was it like that? Oh, I don't think it's like this. But eventually we think about it from enough angles through self-reflection that we come to a personal understanding of the meaning. But it's not enough to do that. Now we must integrate it into our lives. We must assimilate it. We must really make it become one with our very being, until this is something that's just naturally part of our thinking, part of our inner landscape and our behavior. We need to habituate or meditate. Meditate means to familiarize in something over and over again, repetition and familiarization. And that's what we've got to do. We have got to familiarize in what we have learned. And so that you have self-reflected and analyzed, incorporate it now into integration into your thoughts and into your attitude, into your actions. And then what actually we develop is we develop wisdoms. Actually, there's the threefold wisdom. The wisdom that arises from learning, the wisdom that arises from contemplation, and the wisdom that arises through meditation and familiarization. And among that wisdom that we develop, the earlier wisdom that we first develop, actually, as we continue to practice, clarifies. Things get clearer and clearer and clearer until it makes perfect sense. It is vividly and crystal clear. And so our wisdom actually clarifies.
Something you lose the country, Chanchuki Semkegi, Liu Yenemenadre, Ranchinzin like Kundutaya, Jenchinzi Yundentaya, Adajin Jagita, Damga Yenemen, Damga Dilizaba Yomare, Damga Wandina, Damga Zabushiburi. That's Susi Yamle Majena, Damgas of the Penta Yomarwa. Mone Tani Ketchimpure. That's Susuki Toso Samtane, Yani and those. Rangi semlen grua yoanji 수수 제거로마도 취신인 교환로에 카보리 교라랑 기탄 거로와 빼미스버 깨침버리스.
Chapter 8 that we've been studying is a very a crucial kind of a crossroads, a crucial chapter. Actually, it's said to be most important when it comes to understanding how to arouse bodhicitta, how to really become altruistic, how to really get rid of all that self-agenda and really turn oneself into someone who is there for others. This is really the chapter that will make it or break it for you, whether it's, you know, you're going to be able to do this. So much of those trainings are concentrated into this one chapter that really verse after verse looks in so many ways at why self-agenda is so faulty. It does not serve us in positive ways, and how when we turn rather outwardly in serving others and even exchange our own self-concern in place of our own self-concern, now let's take that self-concern and let's put it on caring about others equally, and how transformative that is. That's what chapter 8 is all about. But if you just read it, if you just learn it, if you just know it, it's not beneficial. That's not what benefits us. And honestly, this is so important. What benefits us is really practicing it, really doing it, really embodying those trainings. And so day after day on an ongoing basis, this should always be in your mind, to really have like a flip side of the way things have always been, and really be out there in concern for others and in service for others. And, you know, this really comes down to each and every one of you personally, to carry this attitude and to accomplish this attitude, because if you're going to have personal transformation that occurs on this, you know, inner level, then this is something that you yourself are going to need to be incorporating into your life.
여러분이 중국도 가서 저는 전주대 시라게 셈라 편보여가 중지대 배 전주대 할레베 놈대보 용용 아니 저자잡보 펜토보 즉 하정 진립진지레스 디나네 전주나네 양 아니 저벨리우나 삼된 리우니 결혼서 최케 밀링긴지나 로나 셈는 그로 누구레스 펜도 용그레스 중도와 내가 낭바시다 때 이내 인텔리장 아니 가서 가서 누구지 용사대 공주기 견지대 제단도 공주기 견지니 지금 거래 때라서 바 공부하래 리우두바데 숨고하래 아니 란친징기다 진진제거래 이게 다 삼된 리우다베 리우제바데 숨으로와 인디가라 간지 장주기 셈 자첨보노 자첨보 레세와 잠지 팽거와 말해 그 미팅조데 뭐진디 미팅조데 뇽을 당고 거래 zopaye pe sonam chamur zopaye abore zopa maumana luinzebu yu luinzebu tugrese de samji pengyo amare zopa gombar chebala khongri kyen karandu khongri nimi karandu jedang nimi karandu jedang kyenchi karade te hago gorwa te hago goneti jedang nyurutang rangchinji nyurutang barna ten pento gorte ma to pento e marwa shepa zamgi pento go maran namba chubi namba sangi bichede shiche maren dupche rez gore duba nyamnin che gore mada she nendi pengi mare ze gore she de pengi anada kambe go le speaker da redo pe maina lo shana ta pe yata jo guguro kabakasa tigi pengo mare ka samu ya batang go pe misme ne chambore
His Holiness the Dalai Lama also continuously points back to this very text, this the way of the Bodhisattva, speaking about really that it is a text when it comes to working with our inner mind, that this is so beneficial, this text, and that this text is it's concise, it is beautifully expressed, it is beneficial, it's profound, it holds so many blessings. His Holiness again and again is saying that about this very text. And points to, is especially in particular, the chapters on patience and the chapter on meditative concentration, the one we're in here, chapter 8. And His Holiness is always saying that whether one is affiliated with any spiritual practice or any religion doesn't even come into the equation. For someone who has no connection to spirituality or religion, if they were to really study and practice chapter 6 on patience and chapter 8, how incredibly beneficial it will be to everybody, no matter who. And of course, no need to say how beneficial it is if you are a Buddhist practitioner. And so, for example, in chapter 6, we learn about, so chapter 6 is on tolerance and forbearance, patience, really developing a very tolerant and patient attitude. And in order to do that, we must not only study that attitude, but we have to study kind of the opposing factors to that attitude. And that's anger and hatred and resentment, those kinds of attitudes where we lose our patience. So it's really important. So it speaks all about those conditions that we have to work against. And we do that with patience. So we also understand then, and through, like, for example, in chapter 8, we really learn to investigate and analyze our own sense of a strong sense of a self, and like dearly clinging to that self, cherishing it, making sure we're always acting in self-agenda. And we see that is the very basis upon which the afflictive emotions arise out of. That's something we really learn in chapter 8. And this is something that we learn to get control of. We learn to identify self-cherishing and the afflictions that it brings up. And we learn to get those under control. So it's very pivotal. This is very transformative chapter in this chapter 8. And so, in other words, we understand that, bodhicitta is very sacred. The mind of bodhicitta is very sacred. It's very precious. But just knowing that alone and just learning that it's important alone, just like as we said, just learning about patience isn't enough. We have to learn about the non-conducive factors to that mind. So in the same way, we have to learn about the non-conducive factors of bodhicitta. And so when we are tolerant and patient, there is so much merit. This is very meritorious when we can be patient. And in order to be patient, we have to pinpoint and understand hatred and anger and see the faults in hatred and anger. And we have to see the negativity in that, the damage it does, and we have to see where it comes from. It comes from an orientation of someone to get angry, really like, oh, you offended this, my precious self. So we look at that feeling that way about ourselves. Otherwise, and then we put this into practice out there in our daily lives. It's said, Buddhism isn't something just to know or just to speak about. It's something to actually take up, because just knowing about it isn't something that's going to be beneficial. It is important to think about it, but then it's important then to put that we've learned into practice.
다 그상만은 배 다신 제 산이 가르로 다신 제니 조원념 술렘베 왕도 제바달라 sabje 지에베나니 다 먼저 다신 제니 섬로 배 섭배 섬로 야부지 코리나 더둥 개왕함에 빠차왕기 인유몽께 용거와 와다티 인디도 오고빠 차르체바 란된 바지레 조와 니미스타와 란된 수수페 란된 코슈치 부제나 대견 첨부로와 란진진 되기 장거로와 와다티 니미스타와 위기니 발라타파 sembiwan도 제바 sabje 지에베나네 그상 위기 왕도 제바나 나세기 sabje 망보지니 위기 왕도 제바 생인데 차라 위 나는 아주 리텐디 위라네 베 겐지니 위디 겐지니 야랑 진진 장용하기 냐가 그래 딘디 인디가라 위텔라네 베 니미스타 우레 zeta 그자니 디 sabje 망보탐는 도선 오다티 시모지게 쳔보레 위 코나 란신데 가서 삼당과도 뺏게 쳔보레 위 땅보 아니 베 미자원 제수tum데겐 루지레 에 루디기 니미셰 거다 연den시는 연den시 기어와 위기 니미데 위기 유코랑 미자원 젤tum데겐 위기 란신 미자원 젤tum데겐 에니 개와치마 양 중앙 란신 쟁용게 치마 중앙 쟁겐지 근데 인디가라 류레테네 시다게 차진지 류라 대지기어 말해서 해야 돼 뭐야 니수레 맞아 장주기 셈 냠는 책엔지라 님보 삼는 님보 땅 거래 양 뒤주니 류들 앞에 나대 맞아서 텔랍고 말대 양 하고 거래 류티 상니 밀류티 상니 에네 상기 고방도 류데 꿀지 왜 초라 땅 거야 돼 대승과 인규
Okay, la so dene chik nga chik chak la song gerpa rangdun bashik cha ginepa luginepa da shipa
jipa semki wandu cheba atirin sheyadri
oh that's so yeah. So where we left off in our text, we are looking at the practical like applications and practical practices that we can now take up and look at, having already learned and trained in exchanging our own happiness for the happiness of others, exchanging self and others for and that comes in under that there are 4 subcategories of looking at our needs and how that which we like need and are attached to plays into our experiences. Secondly, when we concentrate simply on our own aims and meaning and agenda, how this is the faults in this, and being, Geshe-la explains that when we are simply looking out for ourselves all the time, this reinforces self-cherishing. It increases it, it grows it, and it really reinforces it. The third subcategory was looking at some of the faults that we encounter due to this physical body, having a physical body. And the fourth, which we pick up at today, is involved with the mental processes. And how we sometimes find ourselves that those are problematic for us as well. And the reason now that we go in more depth and look at these 4 categories after we've already trained in exchanging ourselves for others, we already know it, we already accept it, we already agree with it and all that. But what happens is because of in former lives, the karmic imprinting of former lives ripens in this life. and can bring conditions that will cause us to have like stronger self-clinging or more afflictive emotions, even though we rationally know that that's not favorable, we don't want that, they still ripen in this life. So we have to continue to watch for those and keep, things under control. And so when it comes to that third category of looking at some of the faults that are incurred due and unwholesome acts due to this physical basis, it's because we have a physical basis. It often gets us into situations and conditions that are very likely going to encourage that self-clinging, encourage egocentricness related to the physical body. We meet with a lot of conditions that might reinforce that that selfishness, that kind of self-agenda. So we also look strictly at the nature of the body. So not just the conditions we meet because of the body, it's also very important that we look at the very nature of the body itself. Under it all, there's lots of unclean substances within or that the body produces. And it's very important that we see the faults as well as qualities. We're so focused on really pampering this body. We must understand that physically, both from the cause of this body, like our father and mother's substances, it's unclean, nothing so beautiful and precious and sacred. Its own very nature is unclean, a lot of unclean, impure substances. And again, due to this physical form, we are led to another life, the next life that will incur suffering. So therefore, understanding from all of these directions and perspectives, then it's really important to do that, because then it's not like, oh, this precious body, I have to take such good care of it. My body's so important. It really changes our thinking about that. And it makes us think again about this body. Sometimes it's our undoing. But also, that being said, again, we must understand that it's not all bad, in terms of this physical body. It's like not all negative. Especially, we can understand that this, this human form is actually through our physicality that we can accomplish virtue, that we can do good things, that we can purify the mind and become an enlightened being. We can actually, if we use this body for the purpose of good, we can be brought along to become an enlightened being, like a Buddha. And so there are also very positive aspects to understand as well.
Tende 통구에나 다른 리송고레스 가르치는 틈된 연ring 소에나 텔레스나 망보체스 다 소소 랑팀 랑기스tun데 아니 개회 철라도 꼴주지 리드 그 개회 철라 꼴주제되나 선함기 쳐 라보치사야 상기 사버던 로야데 리텐디도는 제투고래 다시 딘딘 다 랑팀 랑기송고래 팀즈데 젬바지고 지바이나 칼레오라 랑팀 랑기스나 팀데도네 레완용그리 기부요래 팀된 요리 소에나 텔레스나 망부체 제송도
나 카레
팀된 앞에 리들라니 베 랑팀 숭제 베 개위 초라 고주제베나 아니 디도네 스나 망부사네 상기 사브도 로에요레라고래 베 미스베 구지 좀 못데 리기님이긴 돔데되게 얘기도 와
And also, Master Aryadeva said in the 400 verses that seeing the faults of this body, we perceive it like our own enemy. Even though we see it so, we must protect it. For if we channel this body as our servant and urge it into virtue, then through this form, through this body, we can reach the ground of a Buddha. And so what's being said here by Aryadeva is that we ourselves have to be our masters and create our own rules and restrictions. We have to create the boundaries ourselves, and we have to protect those boundaries. Those boundaries meaning restraining ourselves from negative action and encouraging ourselves to positive action. In that way, we're our own protector. We're our own guard that actually assures us that we will go from lifetime to lifetime, happiness to happiness. To expect that this is going to come from an outer source is just kind of a foolish thought. So it's we ourselves that form the basis of our boundaries and regulations. And through doing this and observing those, the merit is really quite, is immeasurable. It's very, very strong merit, such so that it brings us to Buddhahood. And so what's being said by kind of creating those boundaries, as Aryadeva is saying here, is so those negativities that we're talking about, those misdeeds, these faulty part that comes along with this whole package of this life and this existence, we must understand them and restrain them. And that's what's being said.
Nimbola zombe topki was, Nimbo tape, Miguel Nimbo, Rewa to Wara, Nimbo, Miguel Nimbo, Rewarwa. What a Nimbola zombe topki, zombi top, chum, somebody lapchabuche or relagor. Any Sumbadaje Nibadaje. Ta sumba gewe mi pala zichi to nyambra jabas. Gewe mi pala zichi to nyambra jabas. Subject is the bell. Sub ketchimudwa. Ta tampo Karzana. Gewe parche loper Allah. Jibayamar sum.
Oh, conda, oh lasso.
Ta tampo gewe parche loper jabasido. Gewa si the carry. Gewa si the Kuranga to some legitangudo. Yawa Hindun Trupki, Samari Genzer, the Tepchiore.
Kialwa
Hindun Trup, Samari begins the day. Tina la Chepale, the one you are Karchuki singing the Sumore. Chawa Kandichi, Chawachine, Tit on the Rangla, the Wajungiana, the Carbogave ladies, Carbogavares. Tati, Nanzo. Yunduta Susu Jawa Lungaki Jawa Karechina Susolangoni Lo Zurne Bogone Diambe Cholunje Nibe Nachola Shibuji in Chajini Dodin Tunanga Semga Yungurua Tilla Gomarta Lo Zurne Bogone any Jawa Cheniti Tony any pe Pula Pembe any the Washing Jungiana
Lo Zorsina.
Lo zur sedigala lo cholung mepa.
Oh, chore mepa.
Lo tangpo cholung mepa. Zor ne sedupe tempo. Ota tendigi chene ni Pula ni pe Nipa Mandene, the one dingiana, Tigawari, he loved it. That Tigil de Tana, Chepale Devachung, Chepale Dunganjua, Migi Sin Chagdwa. What are those Chidigalat? What is all Samritana Yabudwa?
And so now we come to that fourth category. And so once we have looked at the physical aspect from the physical perspective of what we meet with, now we look at the mental aspect. So things in regard to our mind. What kinds of things are involved in, what kind of influences do we have here? How to work with this from a mental aspect. And there are three subcategories here. The first category is how to reverse or clear away obstacles to virtue. That's the first. The second one is how to look at applying ourselves to the antidotes or remedy things in regard to accomplishing virtue, so relying on antidotes. And then the third one is how to stay single-pointedly focused on accomplishing virtue. And so we look at the first, turning back or reversing, turning back any obstacles that we may have to creating and being involved with virtuous activities. The first thing we need to do is we need to look more at that word virtue. What does it mean? What is goodness or wholesomeness or virtue? How do we need to think about that? We have to identify what that means. If we want to turn our focus to virtue, we have to really kind of pick that apart. And then Gyawa Gendun Drup, in one of his writings, speaks about this. So it's a text on using our intelligence to understand valid cognitions, how to have valid cognitions. And in this book, he does just that, where he looks at identifying what is a wholesome deed or a virtuous deed. And so, first of all, if whatever action or activity we're involved in, if it is a positive, if it brings forth positivity for the subjects that are involved, then, and so favorable things come about, favorable motivation, favorable things come about, then this is what is called white karma or virtuous karma, karma meaning activity or action or conduct. So if it's positive, if everything about it is involved with positivity, then it's virtue. And so therefore we must be, very careful and watchful of the things that we do and say and think, and keep them in the positive side. And then this will be this virtue, or this what's called like a white action. And so this, in order to do that, we have to be very careful that our mind state is one that is controlled, it is stable, it is impartial and unbiased at the time of all of our actions and words and thoughts, because otherwise we're thrown into a scurry by, partiality or strong attachment to like one outcome or not. So we must be very careful to be separated from that but just look to benefit through those words or action. And if through doing that happiness is brought about, then again, this is what has been identified as virtue. And so it's very important, this part of a controlled mind, really in control and not influenced by our prejudices and our own wants and so forth. On the other hand, if there is harm or negativity or hurt being brought about through one's actions or words, then this would be the opposite, negative karma or non-virtue. And so that's what we first must identify between virtue and non-virtue, or in regards to virtue.
Regionala Chepale Dewa Juan Karchu sing Temato Chepale Dungan Juan Najuki sing the Zurdu Sunamare. Takoti did Samutana deal detana Chepale Dungan Juan that Nachu Monichagada, Nabumati Legdoa. This Samutana Haguda. Do so Samdane, Gundu Samdane, Maranzu Lunga get Chawa Chidigala, and Ipe Kanchi Migu Chola Mindoaji, Katuina. Bio tan tenshi tengwa pe misibe kechimore yundu.
And so in that text on valid cognitions, then there's not much more said than if a black action or negative action is one that brings about suffering. And there's not much more to be said about that. And honestly, if we're really honest about it, we can know and understand that. There's nothing said about, having stability in mind or impartial, being impartial or unbiased. It's plain and simple. If it brings about suffering and hurt and harm, this is called negative karma or black karma. Again, we have the white karmas and the black karmas. And therefore, it's very simple that we should always, be very conscientious of what is coming out of our mouths, of how we say something, of what we say, of what we do, because this makes all the difference as to which direction it goes in, whether it goes into the black karma or the white karma, negativity or positivity. And we don't want to go the way of negativity. As much as we can, we must always abstain from non-virtue. And in order to do that, what this takes, and again, constantly, it takes us always on an ongoing basis being guarded and conscientious of what we're doing and saying.
Shologa Yadang Geju Kenga Padre Subject Tambode Give Parchit Loper Chawasi, the Give Parchituna, Tate Dogoya, Meazoya, Tate Sungware. David Chipit Chopachos, Chipasidiga, Ranchins in Ro, Nanga sing the Ranchins in Lo Shu Chumu Yondela, Chipasigorda, Chipasideta, Yarmudian and Sunda, Chipasin de la Tanya Sumiores, Jusa Sumiores, and Chik Ranchins in Shira, Shu Chumbo and Chipaziachic, not so again, Puchunjula Chipazia ni. Puchunchula. Any Tolam Topgen la Papa, Tolam Matopgen la, Tonging Musum to Togen la Papa, Tonging Musum Matogla, Chipasiki the young Chipazia. That under the Chipasia de Hachang Sem Pusutopo. Injitsina Nero Manded the Tapet, Ranchins, Shochumbo, Yending, Jenchin touch the Jen Sidigal touch the Ketu singing Semde, Yending Tendi Semdengila, Chibasi Gore. Chesa, David Chipet Chopacho, that Lunagi Chopayungora, Luinga, Isungi Chopacho, Avaki Kepi Jengede. Paye Tamnin, Tenchenis, Payuba, Tapaye, Tencheni, nida mupa do parcha ese ta nita any mupa ta tizu ta ngone gewe parcha chegorwa tizu me aso gore se sungdo chimbuwa wada de gundu ngazo samdangwa chagore.
And so now we pick up where we left off, and we're in chapter 8, picking up in verse 185, which speaks to that first subcategory of turning back, reversing any obstacles to virtue, or clearing them away, ridding ourselves of them. And here in verse 185, it says, "And so, enough of all my childish ways." And so first, we look at, okay, well, it's very important that if we do have obstacles to our virtue, that we need to avert them in some way. We need to rid ourselves or avert them in some way. And here, the very first one that's brought up is our childish ways. And so when it says childish, I also sometimes myself personally like to use immature, because I think we can relate to the word of immaturity. Someone who's childish or immature, it's just about me, me, me. It's about, I want this, I want that, me, me, me. It's really all about oneself. And that's a very immature attitude. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama speaks about these immature and childish beings. And he always does point out that there are three ways, that there are three definitions of childish when it comes, that'll come up within the perspective of the Buddhist teachings. And the first one is in the way that we've just discussed. Someone who is very egocentric, they're all caught up, they're all about themselves, and they're all caught up about themselves. And that's the first. The second one, immature, childish, is just about being young, low in age. And the third category is a distinction that's made based on the level of someone's realization. So we have what's called an Arya being. And an Arya being is someone who has realization through practice, has reached the path of seeing. They're also called noble beings. And so there's noble beings and there's ordinary beings. And so in the ordinary beings are also, they use the same word here, immature or childish. But again, we're talking about the first case of someone who's very immature and childish. And in this case also, how can we identify this kind of a mindset? This is someone who is very rigid, someone who's very narrow-minded, someone who's very close-minded, and also it's, again, all about themselves, and there's no regard for others. They are really disregard others very much. Others, the importance of others or what others think or want. It's all about them. And so here, further on, so it says again, "And so enough of all my childish ways. I'll follow in the footsteps of the wise, recalling their advice on carefulness." As we just brought up about always being on guard and so forth. "And I'll shun all sleep and mental dullness." And so here they bring up carefulness. And so again, we spoke about that just a moment ago. And whatever we say or do, we must always, not just let it spurt out or flow out or just act without thinking. We must always be guarded and carefully curate that which we want to do and say in accord with what we want, how we want to be. And then it brings up mental dullness here. And mental dullness would be one of those things that we mentioned here in the subcategory. It's an obstacle to our practice. It's an obstacle to virtue. And therefore, we need to avert it. We need to rid ourselves of this mental dullness or lack of kind of a spirited, motivation to be doing something. And so this is, something that's very important to reflect upon. And do we have, I'm not sure if Janet's there today. Janet,
Yeah, I'm
are you
here.
out there today? Okay. Or whoever would like to read, if we have other people that would like to read. Yeah, do we have other versions?
Laura, did you want to read the Wallace?
Sure. So enough of worldly conduct, recalling the teaching on conscientiousness and warding off drowsiness and lethargy, I shall follow the wise.
And the Bachelor is, so enough of this childish behavior. I shall follow in the steps of the wise, and having recalled the advice concerning conscientiousness, I shall turn away sleep and mental dullness.
가서 야서름 붙이게 니송도와 대회나 베베 시바탕 납셈 너셈소 지네기 미든 조스 따다 간제 단다디 셈 항자 요르네발라 납셈 너셈 드반 데세 때투kan게 다 견제게 어라 지네투발라 어따티지 인디갈라 란도라 케베 상게 단창선는기 지수니에 데스 그 채널을 빠이베 담니 템버체니스 타페 빠이 생과데 페미스베 그 초라니 페 빠이 생과 레세도 데스무도 니타 무바소 지어체베 지니기 파체레스 니타 무팔 테게데 지니기 파체레스 디임발라 시팅기 룽장도 시팅 시비팅이데야 고물루루 그승로와 와다티나라 가르송도 고땅 겨땅 네심 무파땅 니땅들 안든당 태좀테 디방 앞에 때다 개월 노르 이게 따때다 메어서데 개we 노르레시 와다티 니가라 디방 아시디가라타 간지
Okay, Drupanga Yankirchik Kale Tetsum Drupangasana.
디방아된 디리 depende cha tangpo depende cha che ne semche ugonjo ni che ugopadang gyopa ni chi che
Gopadang
gyopa chi che
Yopa.
oh ani ni to mupa ni chi re deni tesum nyomongchen oda 띵하들라 디방아래 간지 진이주발라 지다네 다 미개와 초강가 제게도 진이주발라 땡하고 좋은게 지지겨래 인디가라 시다게 개 첨부지는 승우도 윤도 돼서 토라갑 아니 직 양내양도 삼당네 벤도용 거래
And so here also in Gyaltsen Rinpoche, Gyaltsen.
Gyaltsen 탐제 캠바 제르무치로마 또드레. 가든 티바땅 부드레다.
Okay. And dene nabsem nursem dang.
depindocha 디방아데.
Chikpore, yeah.
depindocha 직제.
Yeah.
Teni
Nerpa gyupa nidang nerpa.
Nursem. Teni gonjoni sumpatje. Ni muni de jibaje.
Yeah.
Tesum nyomonje de ngaba.
Okay. And then
Itu jinitu belangeji gyores.
And then Gyaltsen Rinpoche, the main.
Gyaltsen Rinpoche sundu ene shirina takarang yore. Shipitingi.
Yeah.
Lundubgi.
So Gyaltsen Rinpoche, who was Jé Rinpoche, Jetsun Kapa's main disciple, as well as Master Nagarjuna in the letter to a friend, spoke about the 5 obscurations. And these 5 obscurations can also be seen as not just negativities, but as also obstacles to practicing virtue. And so these are to have like a strong clinging desire. That's the first. Malicious intent is the second, or ill will. The third is our wants and regrets. The fourth, sleep and dullness. And the fifth, doubt. And so it's and also within that same quote from Gyaltse Rinpoche, he spoke about relying on conscientiousness, so heedfulness. And we need to rely on heedfulness to remember what's right and wrong, and to remember that which we're trying to abstain from and that which we're trying to adopt. And so these mindsets are really, they're non-concordant to this. And so therefore, we need to always have that carefulness to abstain from them. And in the context that it was written, it was written because in the context, in this particular context, it was written because they are unfavorable conditions to accomplishing Shinei, or calm abiding meditation. And so again, both of these great masters have spoken about them. So here it says, you know, sleep and mental dullness and so forth. But within the commentary, as we've seen, Geshe-la has more extensively laid those out. Oh, just a minute. I think there's, yeah. And so again, the reason that we do want to avoid them is because they're hindrances to virtue. And so therefore we need to like rid ourselves of them and remind ourselves of this all the time.
Doina la dinishi do dina tudin chugi tabage junjun dewa geva dena tangsha durwa doles namto mari chempote kurui gyatsu lungche ins ta namto mari da zembarzme denzina ranchinzi niga tini mari bachagro mari mishiba mari ba oda namto mari chempoi kurui gyatsu lungche in kurui na pe neya chigores
Kurui gyatsu lung
o kurui lungche in lungche ma lungroya kurui gyatsu na lungya kurui na lungya
lung
terwa ho lungche ins tingoni pe sig nakudwa namto mari chempote kurui gyatsu lungche ins mito tingzin lanena number mito ba tabe zembar meba number mito ba tobe ni tinginjila semchejibi tinginjila neba ina karnena karchigare sidigala khajin tima meba njursi nam khajin yapa je tima meba eni pe sangpu chagres pe yapodwa nge di tango jigu ke gyurche dicheda ti pe yapodu
di durne
dorin
And so also in Dharma Kirti has written a commentary also.
tudin chikitaba
Oh, Tutin.
chikitaba
Okay,
yendem bumzangzer de chunjun dewa chimbo pe yebandu tandi zugjele injini gyurumido.
Okay. So Geshe-la just held up. So it was actually, so there's Tibetan names are used again and again. So Dharma Kirti is Chukidrapa. This is Tupten Chukidrapa. And Geshe-la just held up the commentary. Did you see that big book? That was the commentary that he has written on, you know, written on this text. And so we can see how extensive it is. And it's called 100,000 excellent qualities. And so within that, he cites a sutra, so where the Buddha himself, the words of the Buddha himself said, and I will paraphrase here, Geshe-la will send me the quote and I will get it kind of precisely. if I'm able, where he says that the ignorant conceptualization, the great ignorance of conceptualization catapults us into the great ocean of samsara. And the not resting in equipoise of non-conceptualization, we achieve the stainless skylight state. So in the sky, so in the beginning, as Geshe-la explained, when we think about an ocean, an ocean, this ocean of conceptualization, all of these thoughts, meaning our, thoughts of, that come from seeing this all as true and real, and of clinging so much to, my sweet and dear self, all of the concepts that are constantly arising is like this ocean of ignorance, this ocean of not knowing. And that's what we're thrown into through conceptualization, these waves of this, ocean of samsara. And yet when we sit in the non-conceptual state, we sit in a state that is free and clear and open like the sky. And so, yeah, Geshe-la said he'll send me that quote. And
lui namto ke lui dunzing ke bal lui la ne chawa mangbe me dunzing nyu che chawa nyu che dunzing lui den dunzing ke ba ji ko are sem namto ke ba ji namto ndame de sharina ni pe jini ya futu tu ko mare sem namto ke emba lui dunzing ke emba ko are na me se ke chembor tikite.
So when we speak about accomplishing calm abiding meditation, in particular, this particular kind of meditation, then there are there are from two perspectives the way that we need to go into retreat. We need to retreat away from any busyness that is in relation to our physical body, our things, the work we need to do, anything we need to do physically. Also to be in a quiet place, not a place that is, busy outwardly with a lot going on. So we need to be physically in a retreat place, a very quiet and still place with not a lot of busyness. And we need to retreat from the busyness of the world. We need to retreat this body away from the busyness of the world. And we need to retreat the mind away from the busyness of arising thoughts and concepts. So when there's a lot going on around us, it would be very hard to sit in stilling the mind to get to this state, and also to accomplish meditation. If there's a lot of busyness in the mind, we can't accomplish that state either. So it also, this advice comes up in meditation as well.
Yeah, that you're gonna toss compal kangyang la kyang toss chigina unsan tangina.
Okay.
Chizuchi la tsodosha.
Okay, so we've gone a little bit over an hour, so let's take a break here. We can take a 5 or 10 minute break and stretch your legs, and we'll return after that. So take a break if you need one.
Something at the very end of before the break.
Okay.
What was the state other than meditation that we need to retreat our bodies and minds?
We need to do, well, there are two things. We need to retreat physically away from the busyness of the world, and we need to retreat mentally away from the busyness of our own thinking.
Sem namto ngempale enna kaban rosong na tape retreat ngema chagorta.
But actually, if you keep yourself away from, if you retreat away from negative thinking all the time, wherever you go is the excellent retreat place, Geshe-la said.
Thank you.
Temado vide embajilende sem namdogi pe kabakasale diena ke pendomasa.
So, for example, you can be in the perfect retreat center, in the perfect solitary place. There can be complete, like, physical solitude around you, and your mind could just be busy and running around all over the place. And really, what kind of retreat is that? So we need to retreat away from the constant thinking, the conceptuality.
Kagibe mambowe sungda sem namdole emba luin dinjinge emba de shibuji kechimutsi gore.
And especially within the teachings of the Kagyu lineage, there's a lot of talk about just that, being secluded from the busyness of the world and being secluded away from the busyness of one's own thoughts.
Luin namtoge emba de tubina luin dinjinge emba yongmare. Yor mujangama New York sunje nangdigala. Ta kiranso tangpo le tangpo lega chedigala luin dinjinge embajin dene sem namto en suba embajin de any teacher the pe miso kechembores. Any sem namto ge embade pe yabu jitubina suso control sem de la control yabu jitubina. Deni jenden jela pe dinjin yosa yone ta pa khapti chagores jenden chagores.
Oh, mm-hmm.
This Garmuchi this one, Betty, Mune the Ma Chamberda. That Chanchuki Sem Sidala Jendin Jedra. Mimi London in the nation, then your hemia. Tango Rangone, Suso Chick Luin Dinzin Chambomion Yadang, Namdong and Mamion, Susu Yabuji. Sem del control to Bajigura. The tubes on it in a Kaban Rojanata, Embinere Chazan. Sem Gran to be in a Chazan Embinere.
And so, His Holiness always instructs for beginners that they should first go to a very quiet place, a place that is away from, secluded from busyness of the world. And secondly, then work with their mind to seclude themselves or retreat away from a busy mind. And what this means is to kind of bring your thoughts and your mentally what's happening under your own control. So first we learn to control that and control our minds in a solitary place. That's the place to train. But then after that, as His Holiness says, then go back out into the world and accomplish others' benefit. And this is His Holiness's really great advice, because what is bodhicitta? Bodhicitta is just that. It is accomplishing the benefit of others. And nothing other than that. So if we stay in a secluded place that is away from the busyness of the world, there are no people to benefit. But first, again, while we are learning to, control our minds, control our busy minds and our thoughts, it's best that we rely on a very quiet and secluded place while we do this.
Yeah, that.
So we can start now. Yeah, I think let's see if I think everyone is back.
I gather get you get to Padre, gather get you get to Padre. Nimpola Zumbi, Top Kivas, that 에거위 자와이나 다 신이 tum나다 그거위 자와 간지나 대 미팅 초들 답에 가네니 다 준비치네 준비 돕게 빼 님 전바 슈충보 찍어야 돼 대순거래 전바 슈충보 맞으나 때 돈다 용수서바지 뚝뚝 말와 룽알 용수서바지 뚝뚝 말와 가르자는 아주 토마 매번에 딴다 버도 랭암이 빠차 빼 투부여와 대수세고 그러와 대수세라 당문에 아주 슉지 갸나마다 용말을 슉 갭스가 왔다 톱기스도 슉 갭스가 와래 인규 야 다 빼대승우다 이할세 투지 체남 따라서 다 문정기 야와 세다 잡아 좀 된데니 손대다 배 타니셔 전에 좀 밀라래봐 디게디 다 뭐네 좀봐 할리비 갈래 망부 잡도아 좀 된데 루루 가와잖아 이 밀라래봐 로숨주 소나지 배 엠비 내려주네 가와 가서 젠도 디게디 삼당고라 좀 비톱게 와서 제도 다 빼대네 리베스니 다 줌차테스 닌세 예와 맘베나 다게 둥알 남터친 저승도 다 닌다 센다 셀라이나 아주 셀랑아주 답에 니말로 세대디 니로도 갈라게 와째요래 니데게 웬걸 그래요래 니로도 갈라로 예바빠 아니 직 선바sam보 전주기 sem기진베 토니 젬벤 사무다디 니지로에네 니데 찾아 게번 누구래 디제 애니베 조게 야라네 렘사 라네 전주기 sem기 뭐아체 애니 도스체니 직 니로로 버도양 전주기 sem기진베 자와지 젠로이나 추정이 sem지 따다 그걸 로서 어도도스체 지기래 마마이 장주 세바다니 좀 된데다니 배 문지 기부담 받아서 두스제는 냠는지니 배로와 어때마다 인데 생이가 되네 갈릭 잡네 간지 니바데 파 장와제네 애니 동알 제기 유데 동알 요에기 유데 제프르제네 애니 동알 타르 침바데 빵제니 에게위 초 용수서버지 제월 때마다 준비 또 마케나 동알 타르치해지 백하버에서 숨으래. 병원에 와.
And so then verse 186, which we will come to next, speaks to the second subcategory of being diligent in applying oneself to the remedy. To a remedial action of non-virtue and to virtue. And so we must be diligent in that. We must be diligent in that which we do. For example, whatever it is we do, whatever virtuous activity it is, be it to accomplish calm abiding meditation or some other Dharma practice, we won't be able to fully accomplish it if we don't apply concerted effort. And that's because we have negative karmas. We have the imprinting of negative karma that is very, very thick, very, very thick. And we actually have to bring this to exhaustion. Not wait for it to kind of, putter out, but we need to bring it to exhaustion. And in order to do that, we need to really make effort, great effort. And so here in the first line, it says, like the Buddha's heirs in their compassion. And so here it brings up, past masters. And we think back and we think about, for example, Milarepa and the yogi Milarepa, how much he practiced, how diligent he was, how much he went through to make his accomplishments. And so it's this kind of effort that we're talking about. And it further says, I will bear all that should be borne. For if I do not labor day and night, when will my sorrows reach their end? So we see the diligence and what masters, past masters and accomplished practitioners went through, like Milarepa, to make accomplishment. And we need to bear with all of that and be diligent as well. And we need to do that day and night. As a matter of fact, we can accomplish it during the day and make our concerted efforts and really strive. But also then at night, as we're lying down to go to sleep, we can once again recall and embrace bodhicitta and think about our work in the world of goodwill and benefiting others. And then when we sleep, even all of our sleep time will be virtuous as well under the influence of these thoughts and of bodhicitta. So both day and night, 24 hours a day, we can really bring to virtue if we really make concerted effort. And all the Buddhas have done just this, as all of the past great experienced practitioners have as well. Day and night, they work towards virtue. And in order, as it says, if I do not labor day and night, when will my sorrows reach their end? So what does it take to really bring an end to suffering? We must, on an ongoing basis, constantly be looking to rid ourselves of faulty actions, words, actions, behaviors, thoughts, constantly work to separate ourselves from unwholesome action. And we have to look to separate ourselves from the causes of suffering. So we have to not create the causes that will bring us suffering, which means we have to not commit, avoid committing non-virtue. And these are the causes of suffering. So it's really, to really be free from all suffering takes to be free from all negativity, all committing any negativity. And do we have, let's see, other translations? 186.
Yes. In the Wallace translation, it's interesting. They translated it from the Sanskrit, so there is no 186 from the Sanskrit, but they do give a postnote of a Tibetan version, which is, like the compassionate children of the Jinnas, I shall endure the rigors of righteousness. If I do not constantly strive day and night, when will my suffering ever come to an end?
And the bachelor, just like the compassionate sons of the conqueror, I shall patiently accept what I have to do. For if I do not make a constant effort day and night, when will my misery ever come to an end?
gyawazide sangi sigorwa, sesidi chanchu sebarwa, tuji chimboside ta ninjir kogore. So, gyalzi tuji chenam dangse sungda, tati pejasade sungwarda ngama chungzimbe. Tizugu pe kale chu chumbo gyamne, ani pe ninzen yawame bachine, ta chenla mi dane dezade labgo marte, nimalote labgo marte, chenla ngazo 니데 게윙을 당해야 요래. 사기 태바 전부지 요래. 니 콩은 제베 니디 이기 문설제데 빼져지 요래. 니디 이기 문설제데. 어디네 요래. 니라 게윙이 미게윙이 가르소래. 루마 생기니 숨자 요래. 콩대 요래. 어떻게 인도가랑 아주 장주기 샘기진 만나 가와 아니페 nenjumi sambezina nitea yubichumi chagrwa janju gi senginen cheba chamba chagrwa dusde pete I jayado dusjene nitela oda dusje degala ngaso nite gevengolo gyurayore temisi ke chembur tegede.
Okay, these sungpigeshla ngaso digewecho kani dene madrona dene nigi dutsu didi lumaten.
Nida ta Migui Niyore, Numatangi Niyore. The Yundu ta Keke Masamaje Nilo Shaina, Lumatende, Samuke Matana. Anta Yantebe Chasam Kunelabazonde, Mila Ningasam Jagi Kunelabazonde, and if Condrosani Nikura Kuya Kabore. Any chick tendigini, yeah, Tina take it Migo Chadura. Ta Chanju Gisem Gizimbatan, Tongin Tobel Tawe Zimbatan, that any Tanam Yigituma Jitanji, the Tuji Nishi Samada the Nilogina. Tikanga Nikanga Gavani Chagore. Karmangalonanda, Chuse Gelonanda, Kaze Nidi Rintunji Kazu Kuna, Tinti Chazanga Gavachagorda. The Kundi Neti sooner, the Sake Keva Chambure.
And so here, in regards to this this first line, it says, like the Buddha's heirs in their compassion. So first it points out to, so actually here the word in Tibetan is conquerors. It doesn't say Buddhas. It uses the word conquerors, which means Buddhas. So it says the conquerors and their heirs. And their heirs meaning, so the Tibetan word here, heirs, is here. And what that means is bodhisattvas. So it's speaking about enlightened beings and bodhisattvas, Buddhas and bodhisattvas. And then it says those that have great compassion. So it says tukche chenam. So those that have great compassion. And so these are the types of people that we're modeling after, that we look to take their example. And their example is that they have great, they have great compassion, and, unwaveringly, they accomplish nothing but virtue. And it doesn't mean, when it says here day and night, that they're not sleeping, but actually that they use that time of sleep for virtue. And then there's a great Sakya, a master who wrote about a text about the practice of clear light at the time of sleep, like the clear light sleep practice. And so there are actually practices dedicated to make the time of sleep virtue. So if we just go to sleep, for example, not thinking anything at all, so sleep can be a time of like a neutral, a time of neutrality, or it can be virtuous or non-virtuous. And if we go to sleep with bodhicitta, this is virtue. We go to sleep. If we don't have bodhicitta thinking about others, then there can be some virtue, but again, this is the person of the lesser capacity, someone who's not thinking about the benefit of all. So the greater benefit and virtue is the mind of bodhicitta. If we go to sleep thinking about bodhicitta, bringing that into our sleep and into our dreams, that's very virtuous. But if we were to go to sleep, with hatred and anger and malicious thoughts of wanting to hurt someone, well, first of all, sleeping when we're full of hatred and rage is very hard to do. But then, the sleep itself, with those kinds of thoughts rolling around our mind, it becomes non-virtue. And so again, it can be virtuous, non-virtuous, or a neutral state. And what is the very positive scenario is to go to sleep while with an altruistic attitude, remembering bodhicitta, embracing bodhicitta, and also remembering emptiness, lack of in any intrinsic, innate establishment in things. Hold love and compassion in your mind for all life. And this will be very virtuous. And again, so there is this great text of, the sleep of clear light, and by a very famous Sakya master.
어다 두스르다 윤동아조 니로야다 going on 로고 로투가 조야다 뺏게 침버래. ngal mashidi hagoyo marta shidi kala kaza tutuji gwe chola khatang kwa de ke chimro.
And so we should be diligent also in our efforts to do what we can on our side before we go to sleep to ensure that sleep also becomes virtuous. So go to sleep with these positive thoughts and positive intentions. And Geshe-la had said earlier, as soon as upon wakening, remember Bodhichitta and so forth. And so it's hard, once we go to sleep, this isn't something that we're able to direct as much, but we can direct it before we go to sleep and make diligence so that our sleeping hours also are wholesome.
야, 다 숨바들에 다 야단 개주 겹딘데 솔로가 그의미 발라 지지도 냠버자 바스 다 간제 뒤균도 다 가서 투투 가외 쳐라 아니 지지도 냠버자야 자나 자야데 다 대순거래 같이 sem tempo tuguede pe misu ke chimbu chadiore inguranda 가르잖아 돈다 얼마다 가서 디바 방거로 와 중알 용해야 년디데 시디 니마 방와 중알 제야 미도와 년디데 시디 방와라 뉴모한 디바 방와라 tapé maripa 방구래 lembarzime denjini measo gore lembarzime denji measo la tongi matona lembarzime denji measo tuya kora mido 제가 tongi tobala sem haja pe tempujimena sem te yanga hinge ngajon dobe sem zonde sem yanga hinge tegi tongi to thugo mare dindi sem tempu tuya de te pe misu ke chimba chabare.
And so next we turn to the third point, which is working to establish single-pointed virtue, single-pointedness in our efforts to virtue. And single-pointedness here is the operative word, because we want to focus on virtue as much as we can to stay on a virtuous path. But this just doesn't come out of wishing to do it. Up until now, we haven't, we still need to clear away the things that obscure us from being able to realize the freedom from suffering and these that keep us obscured from wisdom. So we have the afflictive, obscuring factors, and the cognitive, that obscures us, our cognitive wisdom. And so we have these two kinds of obscurations. And, if we look at it, if we think about our afflicted mind, so up until now, we're still, we still have our obscurations, and we're still at the mercy of needing to endure suffering. And that's, we still have afflictive emotions because we haven't abandoned ignorance. We haven't cleared ourselves from being in a state of not knowing, of ignorance. We haven't cleared away ignorance yet. And, this ignorance is a mistaken and perverted view of the reality. It is seeing things to be, you know, a fixation of sorts on things as real. And so we haven't abandoned ignorance, and we can't, and therefore we have ignorance, and therefore we suffer due to the afflictions. But we can't abandon ignorance, this ignorance, which is the fixation on a true and solid reality, because we haven't seen emptiness. It is when one realizes emptiness that one brings an end to clinging to any true and solid reality in things. And we haven't, if one hasn't realized emptiness, then one hasn't cleared away this ignorance and ended suffering. But to see emptiness, to be able to realize emptiness, is something that we need stability of mind to do. The realization of emptiness takes a single-pointed mind. It takes a mind that has great stability. A mind that flitters here and there, a mind that is influenced or colored by wanting or one's own desires, is not a mind of stability. So first we need to bring about that meditative stability of being able to completely still the mind in order to realize emptiness.
Yeah, that this is the Shologa Yada Captain. Telling Tipa Salichis that and no more Bentipat and Shijin Tipan Tipat Langire. No more Bentipat Sudeta. The charge on control time, you monkey digital down, Lember than the Vinzin that is over, you did not go at it. That Vinzin is Jabba Pachajira. What that is Shitiba? Shijitibala, Shijibala Portuguare, you move in Divada, Tarpatabala Portuguare.
Okay, young care to check the name.
You move in Divategi, Tarpatabala Portuguenge. Is any Shijin Divategi, Shijashibala Portuchuba. Tamje Kembatobala Portuchungenda. Namken Tobiala Portuchunge. Indugalata, thinking of Mava, Sanki Compounds in Tuya Yomarva. The Olata, Lauta, the Indivasature, Lobelan, Semlin de Esig, Lobelams de, that Laton Tubala, Mulejini to Wure, Sem Hafton, Tempo de. Tile Enipe, Lobelam Tatel engaging in guitar, Numupa Tiga Kanga Lobelam Chavare.
La.
You need to engaging in Jura. What is Tape, Maranzo? Jini Tubala Care, Chingwa Gopada Tizukangata, Lopelam Chavar, Lopelam. Jini to Jagalopa. What is Tizusigore? Lopelam, Semlente, Yanta, Mila Tapat, Taprian, Rakinyamba Japarchas, Tape, Tizu, Enipe, Carsore. Chingo la sopa, Enipe. Tizu selni, any embe semahachang tempo de Zitu Nyamja de Tubures, Chimwata, Chimwatarani, Gopatarani, Yoa, Kazani, Mambukajamanpuchua, what that degree. That they got their Dijana, Yambundije get down, and Nipe Nyepanga, Tizukangare. Nyepanga de Zu, that Lopachabare, Jinigi Mitinchore. Tunjo de Jini to Balaya, Nyepanga Celera, Nyebundije get thing for it. What that is, she got the pet catching for that.
Okay, Gondak, any debts, go Thompson, the Nyepana Nasena?
Nyepangazana, and Jini to be a gang Mayore.
Lasso.
What that
100 day, denso.
La
Nyepa Sana, the name.
Nyepazanikin.
Oh, lasso. Lasso.
Kyun. Jini to be engaging.
And so then we look to verse number 187, where it says, thus to banish all obscuring veils. And so in particular, there are two categories of veils, two veils that obscure us. They're like these sheaths that keep us from seeing, that keep us from knowing. They're obscuring veils. And the two are first the veils of the afflictions. And when we speak about these veils, these obscurations, these are, for example, attachment, aversion, hatred, jealousy, all of the 84,000 negative emotions, all of these negative emotions, along with the clinging to a true and substantial reality, these views. These are the obscuration of afflictions. Having these obscurations afflict us from attaining realizations and accomplishment and so forth, from seeing the truth. And then there are the cognitive obscurations, or obscurations, cognitive obscurations. And these are more subtle. These are where the imprinting still has like these stains of the imprints. The imprinting is still left behind. For example, even when the coarse obscurations are gone, there are still the more subtle imprints that have not yet been completely purified away. And the afflictive obscurations prevent us from attaining liberation. The cognitive obscurations keep us from attaining omniscience. They basically keep us from Buddhahood. So even if we have removed the afflictive obscurations, we still will not be able to reach, have omniscient wisdom and Buddhahood, complete enlightened being, because we still have those subtle karmic imprints to purify. And so in order for us to remove these obscurations, we're going to need to have some control over our minds. We're going to need to have a very, very stable mind and have control over our minds. And so we must have a very, very stable mind. And therefore, we need to work on Shinei, or calm abiding meditation. We need to accomplish calm abiding meditation. And therefore, we need to work with the advices of the path of practice to accomplish Shinei or calm abiding, a resting, still mind. And therefore, when it says, so further on it says, I'll bend my mind from the mistaken path, and constantly upon the perfect object, I shall rest my mind in even meditation. And so what those second lines, the second half is speaking about is the accomplishment of calm abiding meditation. And in order to rest our mind upon a perfect object, or rest our mind perfectly in meditation, we must work to avert the non-favorable conditions of having an overactive mind or having a dull mind. And those are what we work on when we practice, when we're working on the trainings of accomplishing calm abiding. And so this is really a very incredible point, because when we learn to set our mind in an incredible, totally still, totally stable state, this is where we gain the ability to accomplish calm abiding, that then will help us to lift those veils. So we must work against the overactive mind and the dull and lethargic mind. And we've spoken that both of those non-concordant factors to meditation have both coarse and subtle aspects, and we've talked about that a lot in the past. But we must see, so in the path of training of meditation, we learn about the 5 faults when it comes, the 5 faulty factors when it comes to meditation in the trainings as well.
다 예방하다 님분들께 이게 되게 장대지 랍고로와 예방아 시드가라 담가제바디 지레 담가제바 담가제바즈네 카레 땅아주 온도 시게디게라 미테 라파이나 옌기 카레 라바데 타타지 마템바이나 담가제파와 아니 곰제베 갑텔라 곰제베 갑투텔라 미테 라파이나 얀 담가제파레 테레 테지지
Okay. Dice por mundo que shula kondak.
Zamga jepa. Mite lana, mite ngazo gom gedi galata chile mi ne te gala semde ne tul tagorwa. Ta nesi ke mite khona de pe shor soina zamga jepa re te. Tela la gor zamga jepa zedi. Oda te chi teni tremba te chi re. Oh, tini zamga jepate jinware chik
Jingwa.
oh jinwa tini gopa sumbache tini jingo ke yondugala ani nimbu mateni che ja shaina jingo peldurwa wada kanje jingo yondugala shijini charache tembe ani pe dijene yankyur Jingwa kanji jingwa ko lepti yoda hakwa lemsan yang miti tigala jaya dere ti nimbun dije du mechana nyepa jigre ta yang jigo lepti yodigala eni pe hajan charachin mangbun dene yang pe dije na yang tingin tu yale kyonge gorwa nimbun dije bade yang matana ti nimbun dije bade nimbun ten matana yang pe shijingi charachi matana ten kyonle jagore nimbun diche bat ngapare kutsar rimbo jugore oda ti dingadala nyeba ngalabre.
Okay. And so these faults that apply to our meditation, that are non-concordant to meditation, are the trainings, like the oral instructions on like averting these faults of meditation. And so the first fault, for example, so within the practice of calm abiding meditation, we have a focal object or a visual object. It can be mental visual object or a focal object. And the practice of that meditation is to keep one's attention on that without wavering from attention only to that object. And so the first one is to realize that one has lost their attention. Your attention has gone off the object. That's a fault. And so then the advice would be, so that's the fault. And then there is advice about that. So to notice when your mind is off the object is one. The second one is to always have like a dynamic of mindfulness. So to, keep a mindfulness, kind of like this tension, so not to be too loose, but there's mindfulness going on. It's like an active meditation. Then there are, so the third is to be have an overactive and very busy mind, so you're not staying on your object. Also, your mind is all over the place, hearing, seeing, thinking, smelling. And then, I'm sorry, that was the fourth one. The third one is to have dullness and sunkenness, being lazy and sleepy and lethargic. So there's no activity, there's no keeping a tight mindfulness because one is getting very lazy and dull. And so those are three, those are put together. And then the fourth is so we have the first one was losing focus, it's off the object, and bringing it back. The second one is losing mindfulness. The third is either the dullness or overactivity. The fourth one is, for example, when you notice that you are either overactive or lethargic and you don't apply an antidote, but you just go on like that, either very lethargically and dull, very listless, and or very overactive. And there's, you've noticed, but you don't bring yourself back and apply an antidote. That is also a fault. That's the fourth. And the last one is to over-apply one of the antidotes, where then you're over-applying it, and then you're just increasing either the lethargic state or the overactive state. So there are these 5 mistakes and the advices that go along with them.
이 법원글람름나 살포요. 이진의 급도로 빼 살포요. 니 또수 디지는 캐나서 대지 사단 빼 야부시그리 빼 야버래. 디니 다 님분 뒤에 예여와. 데 민틴 쳐대. 님분 뒤에 예대 가르자 뒤가라. 눈바래. 이진이나 나가와 제거에 섬데 눈바디 슈 춤보고 와래. 이진이 두고 이진이라 빼 좀나 야본도 세된 눈바디 소소 젠데기 눈바디 슈 춤보고 와래. 눈바디 찍그래. 아니 졸와 매주제야. 이니 이진이기 연된 통 원에 때빠고 와래. 이체
숨바르베.
숨바리 이치기 때빠. 이진이라 연된 통나 이칠리기로 와. 이칠레는 눈바다 좋아도 슈제 용구로 와. 대게 전부 와. 드니 신장래 다 륜심 신장 용구로 와. 드니 템바 드니 시진 셈바 디체 땅님도 예들라 아니 배 님분 디체 예랍고 지수 다 무슨 장가다지 개고 얼마다 설보전 밥은 그때 나타다 뺨 미스베 야보요.
Okay, lasso geshelanga drup matok trimendo tangbo dunpa
둔바
betsunche sorwa yechiche yicheki depa shingjang
데니 신장 템바
dremba
시진
shijing
셈바
or samba.
셈바 일레 제바세 되어라.
Decandre
디제 땅놈
Okay. Ani dumpa, ani sempa ki kola chik sungroche. Sempa.
셈바 스디갈 타페 가래 지는 두비하기 타페 셈바 일레 제바세 타페 젠데 굴론자 말당 의지파기 지는 두발라페 둠 조아 슈 치셔는 치셔지래다. 간지 되는 뒤에 땅념래.
Okay, sama serpoto yana sempa yi la chepa.
셈바 일레 제바 셈바데 밥은 그때는 빼 살부 영화 땡땡지 땡입니다. 밥은 그때는 얘가 빼 살부 시부송되어래.
Laso. Di samlo dangdrelwa yogere. Samlo.
그래 인규 아주 10인 남자 세지 송고하러 와. 눈바다에 셰바이 심중레 솔와 심중레 테파 심중레 신장아레
Oh, laso.
아니 템바니 텔레가르와
Okay.
데니 시진 셈바
Yeah. And so now we have also the 8 antidotes to rely upon. So these are concordant factors that will help one to be able to bring accomplishment to their meditation practice. And so these are just general things to have complete. For if you are, if these are all checked off the list, you're going to have perfect meditation. It's really going to be beneficial for you. And there are 8 of them. And the first one is to have an aspired and inspired interest, to really be interested in doing it, to have, you know, great interest in it, like just like naturally, you know, want to do it, like an inspired interest, and really feel like a connected to it. So really aspired interest in doing it. The second one is to have an element of diligence when it comes to it. So putting, you know, making sure that one is doing it. So we're driven by, to have a drive to do it. And the third one is to have great trust and faith in the qualities of meditation. So if we have number 3, if we have great trust in qualities, if we just, you know, really know how great meditation, what it will bring to us, automatically number 1 and number 2 are going to come along. You're going to have interest and you're going to want to work at it, because it's anything worth having is worth working for. And you know the qualities, and so you're really going to be interested and you're really going to be inspired to do and diligent in doing it. So you'll have 1, 2, and 3. The Xinjiang korla chik sung ro che
Xinjiang de la yu Lu Xinjiang da Sem Xinjiang ni yore.
the
Xinjiang de Sem Lu Hajang yang bu cha go re. Xinjiang tu na ta Sem ne rimba gu yor wa. Gu ba tu sa ne de ni jini 당보 류신장 쪽 되니 샘신장 쪽이야 되네. 류신장 쪽이나 샘 류하장 양보 차고라 심벌 나진. 아니 거주 대보 차고라. 야 이즈밀라 프리아데 류신장 쪽에 따라와서 우승도.
Really. Okay, gesla di ngetri wore. Di ola so. Di ngone di drebu nangshin re yana di nyampo nangshin kandars hakogore.
Lu Xinjiang tubi ina ta Lu Xinjiang tubi ta yini tubi ala pa misiba tini jengin ge tasam chitu go marwa. Nyempu chago ngoni nyempu chago re.
So then the fourth.
Semshin tenane ta zo de Semxinjiang de yongurwa.
Okay. And so the fourth one, which is appliancy, you know, really a flexibility or pliancy, and this comes both mentally and physically. And I just checked with Geshe-la, and I just personally said, this to me seems a little more, seems like one of the results of meditation. And here we're saying it's a like one of the remedies. And so if he could speak to that, and he said when we speak about it, so absolutely it is a result. We gain appliancy and flexibility of both mind and body when we have accomplishments in meditation, especially at the, so there are the 9 stages of Shine or of calm abiding, and especially when we reach the 8th, we reach like a lightness, and again, pliancy of like the physical body and mental body. And here we had, it was Milarepa Marupe Geshe-la, Milarepa Ani Namkalapu. So Milarepa, like Milarepa flew. Well, you know, he was seen flying in the sky, and this is a indication of his accomplishment of calm abiding meditation. But the flexibility of mind, a mind that is pliable, a mind that is light, and can move with the flow of things, also is an antidote. Especially here, mental pliancy here is the 4th antidote. The 5th one is mindfulness. So mindfulness meaning kind of like a focus and concentration, being like, you know, mind, you know, just holding that focus and concentration. Drupa Karere Geshe-la? I didn't write it well, sorry. Yapo Trimendo Gonda.
Nide.
No, nge Yapo Trimendo. Kerang takta sonengai Tripade di Srapamento. Shijin. Oh, Shijin. Gonda. Shijin. Yeah, Shijin. Okay.
Semba ille
Yeah.
semba any
Okay, last.
DJ tangum.
Last one. So the sixth one, so we had mindfulness, which is number 5. But then number 6 is a vigilance. And a vigilance means to have a watch guard that you are mindful and of what is going on. So it's a guardedness, a vigilance about all of these other things, and a vigilant aspect. And then the 7th is that one, is like, has the mind engagement, so that there is mind engagement going on. And when I asked Geshe-la about this, he said, there is mind engagement, this is one of its own category, but there's also mind engagement whenever we talk about inspired interest, diligence, a trusting faith. Those all have an aspect of mind engagement, but it also has its own place here. And then the last one, the 8th one, is to have a perspective of equanimity, or equal nature. So to have that perspective of equal nature and equanimity is the 8th. And other translations of 187.
Okay, the Wallace translation is, therefore, withdrawing the mind from evil ways, I shall always concentrate it on its own meditative object to eliminate obscurations.
Bachelor is, therefore, in order to dispel the obscurations, I shall withdraw my mind from mistaken ways and constantly place it in equipoise upon the perfect object.
Yeah, Janju sebe chupan jubale, something should be liu the gepa was a dazzle zore. Something you liu.
And so now it says, this has been the 8th chapter of entering the way of the Bodhisattvas, the chapter on meditation. So we have now completed that.
Tanda ngasi tina tangde de jela ramadong. Pagina pe misibe yarfu sarfu shusung yo. Jine kaptu delta, jine kaptu dela yore. Kepardo parjin tamani la baase de parjin tamani de samden da tombani toni sherabrawa. Ta samden shebe kaptu de yore namrim nala. Tipe pe misibe sarfu yore. Todos lona tini pendo yorwa. Temato te vizu machina tepe kaburda.
And so here we've come to the end of meditation that takes us directly, so we've directly now, it culminates in the point of single-pointed meditation. And so here we have the last 2, when it comes to the 6 perfections, the last 2 are in, particular, very essential, critical chapters. So the last 2 being, as we've just had, meditative concentration. And then next is wisdom. And within wisdom comes, all of the analysis that brings us to understand emptiness. And so we have these 2, meditative concentration and wisdom, and also within the stages of the path, the Lamrim texts, in Pabunka's Liberation in the Palm, Master Pabunka's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hands, for example, you'll see the exposition of this. And it would be very important actually for you to take time now to read up within those, the Lamrim text, because they really go into details in regard to both of these. And also Geshe-la said that these 5 faults of Shanae, calm abiding meditation, you can look and see also that these are written about in Master Pavanka's Stages of the Path text, Liberation in the Palm of Your Hands. It's written very clearly. Nyempo ge yang ani denang. Yeah, also very, very clear about these 8 factors of reliances of
Pavanka ke selvo sundu ngacho zachochodajire that zamaza susundu parwal lona hakuma lona hakumara.
And it's really this particular text, Liberation in the Palm of Your Hands, which really goes through all of the progressive stages of the path, is a text Geshe-la said they really see as very profound. It's a very profound, and he said very clearly written, easy to understand text. If you read it, you will understand the points, and if you don't read it, you won't understand the points.
Yeah, that there's something sharp gilure that take kabo yore mato kale tos kya bore teno zo kale kya nge kale kya bo ani ta ngati domba ko la ta domba le da ngoni chana sangi chuzo me gone domba le ya de monsem tamje molam gi sudu le ya de ta so Chanjugi semge nyamen jaya shira matukanjila ani ta sangi sa röndugi samtane ani teniji maubananga teniji chungar shos molangene semge adre te sangi chuzo magon lena digiore te kazanga majuimba watatire ani ne kazantandwa Then Mosum Tamja Chens, the Monsum young Chokelayade, Junjuna Yote, Junjuna Yore. Junjuna de Tengo, that Dina la Salvo Shadow, Neti Shin time ba. What I shine Munju Sosor Lenasede. Chidangundi the Shaki, Chanju Tuni Hepatam. Tijindola Pendo, Chanju Semni, Hepergi, Gilensum Zede. Ta the Tigida Monsum Kampalayari, Monsum Tamjachen Layari. Monsum Kambalana, Tiganelena and Digore. Ta Semke Ngola, Nipe, Semke Ta, Nipe, Yala Dumban Rogorwa, Yidi Mado, Karen Dondana, Junju Yala Dumban Donanda, Junju Yala Dumban, Liuji Dan, Chekanruguda. Any Zanjo Yala Dumba Mambuoroa, Dumi Yala Dumbandua.
Dome
Yala Dumba. Yala Dumban Rogor, Injimiji, Yala Dum, Shabachin Mado, Semke Yomara. What that those chene did it.
And so next, so we finished this chapter and we'll be coming to the chapter on wisdom. And this is gonna, it's gonna take some work on our part. This is a tough, tough material to get through. It really is very deep and very, difficult in some ways. And Geshe-la says, so we all are going to need to really, work at it and put some effort forth in this next chapter. It'll be hard for us, but we'll make effort. And he said that he'll also need to put a lot of work into it and make a lot of effort here as well as we come to the wisdom chapter. It'll be work for all of us. And then just to say a few words in regards to taking vows, because that came up, taking vows, like the Bodhisattva Vows. And And so when it comes to, taking up the Bodhisattva vows, there are several ways that we can do that, and different traditions and rituals of doing that. And in this, for example, in our opening prayers, we recited, "Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings." And this is one recitation through which one can take the vows. And this is the epitome of, and this is the way of taking it through an aspiration prayer. And so we have an aspiration prayer right here. And this is strictly aspirational bodhicitta. So we have aspirational bodhicitta and the bodhicitta of application, and we have vows that accord with both. And this 4 lines in our opening prayers, is exactly that. It is an aspiration for someone to become like a Buddha, to be of benefits for sentient beings. So someone who does not yet have bodhicitta is aspiring to be one with bodhicitta. These are the perfect, words to use. So again, I think that, so what we're saying here is we see someone with bodhicitta, or someone who has had one, a great past master or the Buddha, and wish to be like that. And so we make that aspiration, and that's how we take it. Ani dundra yana dane lensum di tangpo di yen la tun yen la di tangpo
yan la vindan etini senke chong ma de charsum de sumbe to la ni sugi like kesong samde samlo shu chombo go are.
And so first we should, before taking, before saying this, to take the vows, the first thing that we should do is purify the mind and confess, and then make offerings, meritorious offerings. And we do that through the 7 branches. And we can find the 7 branches, earlier here in, this text. There's a good chapter dedicated to that. There also, in the aspiration prayer of noble conduct. I don't know if that's something you have, the prayer, the aspiration prayer of noble conduct. It's in there extensively. Also, we had within the Tara practice, Marupeti Dromagi, there also, remember the sadhana of Tara that we practiced together? There are the 7 branches, the 7 branch prayer within that. So Geshe-la said, before you take the vows, first do the 7 branch prayer, which has the offerings and confession included. Then, so you say, recite the 7 branches, and then you come to this, until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and so forth. And you say it 3 times. And on the 3rd time, when you come to that 4th line, the last line, may I become a Buddha to benefit all beings. As soon as that's over, you think, I now have the vow. So there's a mental engagement, a process of, this is where I get the vow. And so that's the way that you would do that for, Also, in the way of the Bodhisattva, if we go back to, chapter 3, I think, right? Yeah, chapter 3, in verses 23 and 24, you take the first 2 lines of each. So the first 2 lines of 23 are aspiration bodhicitta, and the first 2 lines of 24. So in reciting those in place of our opening prayer, you could take it in this way: just as the Buddhas of the past embrace the awakened attitude of mind, just so, and for the benefit of beings, I will also have this attitude of mind. And so you could,
Monsim lembala toso semla marembache dopadi yoache any mo bana mangam diniji lenya yonga shows molam gare da molam sudo desangi chudo me goni gen lena digore tan jusem lenya la toso tereche monsim lena monsim changba lenya de tagi nitangyo de 우마당교대 강바당부니데 데레다 데 몬셈 깡깡래야래
Really?
다음 주셈 깡발레나 지드랑군지 대샤게 전주세베 라발라 테다리지 네바다 디진로라 판데도 렘바진도 라바기제 라인 초가데 주셈 깡깡래야래
Mm-hmm.
당원이 몬셈 답에 디제네 님베 친두기 자발라 냠는 제 제진바 친두기 자발라 배 너바 슈추모 영에 친두라 냠는 제겐지나 문주 지저도 나야 되다 타르샤순 돈 타야 돼
Mm-hmm. Ani Chindrup
누구잖아?
sana? Chindrup? Chindrup.
바로도 짐바도
Oh,
짐베
Chindrup.
짐베 냠는 짐바 전디 조바 셰랍 삼든 티주 냠는 제공은지라 되니 다 문주 지저도 내야 돼 지디디리다 준주나 타르샤순 내야 돼
Oh, lasso.
카갈레나 카갈레야 요래 지저레나 지저레야 요래
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
뒷배 배 세분도 대티 귤디 두스잖아 되니 세보여라 대다 숭자대 저동 저게 니제 지두여다 레라보여 말해
Uh-huh. Lasso. Then conso ani maumpala
문다
gonda ganda ani di pena hakoya gichedo yamena
오 다당에 학고야 쳐들라 거라
hakoya giche. Okay.
오도 두수 네 미트럴 데티 거다 두수레즈네 제도 맞지 서준도 바르다
Uh-huh.
마 롬바테네 마수나 녀바쳔버와
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
장dom도 수수 레난 디거 수준도 바 영원도 땡기 뚜네 레니나 니 녀바데 저통 저게 된 원신 투야데 빼미스 개쳔버레
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
다 저통 저게 나니 우바당 접게 빠데 우바 아니베 로테 저통다 접게 빠데 장주 샘더딩이래 딩이라 배때가 로타키야 단저 저통 중고어다
Mm-hmm.
장주기 샘어도 투사마레 사마단 저통 중고어래 배 잡잡지 거래
Mm-hmm.
대마다 점바 주주여와
Mm-hmm.
상구 주주 메그 로타단서 주주들라 아니베 가르사 군디지 상거 군디지 군이틱 바 지세디어래
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Geshe-la is giving explanation on this, just so that we all understand how, what's involved in aspiration bodhicitta, what's involved in application bodhicitta, and how, when one is ready and when one wishes to, how one would take this up. He is not saying you need to, or that you must now go do this. There is a way that, each, the disciples can themselves do it in this way, do the 7 branches, and then do the recitation from our opening prayers and so forth, and that's the way we get them. But he's not saying that one must. He's informing everyone. And of course, if one has the desire to take up the vows, then yes, then one can take up the vows. But one must also understand that we must be careful, because we need to uphold the vows. We need to protect them. We need to observe them. We need to be able, to do what we're pledging to do. And so, for example, there's the tradition of first taking the aspirational bodhicitta. I have the wish to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I have the wish to become enlightened to benefit all sentient beings. And we aspire first. And then we enter into the practices, such as the practices of the 6 perfections, generosity and morality, patience and diligence and so forth. And when we're actually ready to really take up these practices and we're really committed to actually doing that aspiration, then we can take the vow of application bodhicitta, take up application bodhicitta when we're really going to be applying ourselves. In that case, then that would be 23 and 24, second two lines of each, and I'll just read them aloud. And in the precepts of the bodhisattvas, step by step, abode and trained, and in those precepts, step by step, I will abide and train myself. And so now we're pledging to actually take these up, take up the, take up the practices and really practice the path. But we need to be careful because there are the downfalls of acting, like not in accord with the vows, of breaking the vows. And if one ever, for example, takes up the vow of bodhicitta and then regrets having bodhicitta and, regrets something like this, then this is a root downfall. We have to be careful because we don't ever want to take on something that, we don't yet have the power to, do without regret. And, there are some, so within aspiration bodhicitta, this wouldn't be a downfall, but within dine merpagi dompa lana, dine girpa kena, dine di yang, ani dompa.
장주 쌤 툭사마데 장주 쌤 dorna. 장주 쌤 땅와이나 자동 중고아래.
Mersamki dompa la yang.
다 머슴기 dompa 텐데 자동 쪽에 되고 주섬라 고고아죠. 머슴라다 텐데란 담자 템부여 말고 차상여 말에 주섬인데 자동 쪽에 차상지 숭고아래. 머슴 담자 전숨야장 머슴 몰람 수도 중야 니래. 몰람 수도 중나다 수 마오바네 텐디 제 지용 वर्षों 몰람 개거와. 담자 전숨디가라 딱니 배 상기사 누구인지 담자도 찍어와래. 테니 주섬 지데라 다 셈께네 친구기 자와라 냠nen체도 지진 바라와. 다텔라 배 자동 쪽에 요래. 니지 지두 요래. 다 텐디 윤두 렌댕엔 도지나 아니 무주 지저도 제야데 샤간도 돼야데. 테니 징토야라 텐 전주나 치 장르장제 수지 징토 쪽으로와. 수지 삼라카레 로빠바이나 테니 징토야래. 가와고미야래 쪼쪼. 온간데니 주한테 빼야 버리잖네. 다 자동제도 시과데 빼 미스베 깨침버렸다. 자동 쪽에 뜻어. 다 군디 시절이야래. 주주들라 군디 시장나마도 자동 중고 말해.
나 된다.
주주 여러와.
우리리.
배나 건조 꼴토베 자동 여러 건조 꼴토바. 당아주 초심 간라 건조를 불샤겨지. 아니 민대지는 맞은 렌샤이나 건조 꼴토바래. 딜디 자동래. 제가 잡잡 싶을지 거는 거죠. 딜라 아니 다 대용라 다 건조 꼴토발라 자동용라 군디 지타나 자동용거래. 군디 지마츠나 자동용거 말해. 님이 숨을다 와시데 님이 답에 대산아 깨요 말해. 게 니바 요 말을 라비나 님이 숨을다 와 차버래. 네팔 쩐도 말어봐. 대다 배 답 제나제 게 경요 말을 라비나 쩐도 말어봐더래. 아니 가베거니 아니 네파제야당 가베거니 아니 배 건조 고르토바당. 아니 뭐자 텔메고니 제바니는 두스체는 니지드 상나 티니 자동 중고어 때마상 자동 중고 말해.
싹붙이네 양켜서.
디 주루데 답에 주루데라 군디지 창거래.
Mm-hmm.
자동중화라 군디지 창거래.
Mm-hmm.
장주 샘두르다다 로사징기 자동데라 군디지 창고 말에 디군 로사키에당 레균데요 말에 삼바당 아니 스통이스긴데요 말에 라바당 덴디 삼로 코르당 콘조스미요 말에 덴디 삼로 코르당 아니 자동중루 거래. 군디지 창고 말에
Okay.
빼게 첨버리 디디 시거다 빼.
Mm-hmm. So there's really a lot to know, actually, when it comes to taking and upholding vows. And so I clarified with Geshe-la if it would incur breaking a vow if one only had aspirational bodhicitta. And he said that no, these vows don't apply. So you'll see the Bodhisattva vows and what actually would break a bodhisattva vow. You know, we could read those. There's 18 points of those. But in aspiration bodhicitta, this is something that is in the future. So we're saying in the future, I want to be like this. You know, in the future, I want to be enlightened, to benefit sentient beings. So it's aspirational. One hasn't pledged yet that one is doing it. One aspires to it. It's once one really has the second level of vows that one then is pledging to take them up and apply them, that then the root vows, breaking the secondary, there's root and secondary vows. There's different levels of vows. And so, let me just see what I said about that. And so, you know, we must, really understand that if what's at stake if we're not able to protect them. And then once we do take the vows, for example, so in any ways, in regretting, in that, regretting bodhicitta, if you just had aspiration bodhicitta, it wouldn't be breaking a secondary or a root vow, but only an application bodhicitta. But generally speaking, what we should really do is we should, first of all, remember, once we have taken vows of bodhicitta, bodhisattva vows, there are, like, in the way of the bodhisattva, there are, there are verse after verse that are so inspirational that one is going to want to have, bodhicitta all the time and go back to the book. And we have to keep inspiring ourselves to bodhicitta and actually memorize the verses that are inspirational to you, so that at times that you need to call on those verses, you can call on them and you'll be uplifted and really rejoicing again in virtue and bodhicitta, and, really memorize those. And then also, you must, know the vows, and you have to understand how they work. So there are some vows, for example, that need to have 4 kind of auxiliary factors you have to, to have along with breaking the vow to make it irreparable, like fully severing a vow. And maybe I can get those in writing, but it sounds like what Mark said, we're going to be studying it in the future. So for example, if we take one of the vows that come within these 18 vows, which would be stealing from the 3 jewels, meaning if someone has made a donation to the center, or has made a donation and put something on the shrine and you take it, you would need to have these 4 with it, meaning you could say, oh, it doesn't matter, I can do this, and so forth, or, really supporting and making it a very heavy. If you had all those 4, then is really, severing the vow. But without all those 4, it's not. And other vows can be broken without those 4 at all. For example, if you say, oh, there's karma doesn't exist, I can do anything I want, there's no consequence to my action. Things are existent. They are not empty and dependent. They really exist. or there are no three jewels. The three jewels don't exist, and one renounces the three jewels. These all would be break-in vows without having to have any of those four in play at all. So we need to understand the vows and what's entailed in them and how they're broken and so forth. As we undertake the vows of bodhicitta. However, that being said, then there is the confession and restoring of the vows. The vows, unless it's a very severe action, they can be restored. Okay, and actually Geshe-la will send me those four, which I'm sure I have in my files, but So Geshe-la said he will send those, and it's really very important that we know both the main vows and the auxiliary vows in all their enumerations, because then we can act in accord, with all of them, because they do go along with, the conduct of a bodhisattva. However, that being said, if we simply gain control over any kind of immaturity or selfishness, self-centeredness, if we eradicate that, then there's no need to pay attention to all of these, different, be it the 18 or 26, whatever vows there are, one doesn't need to attend to them, because without any sense of a self or self-agenda or self-clinging, one is already on track. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama is always saying that one can not pay attention to all of those details of upholding all of these, but just simply be someone who proceeds in the world and engages in the world without any self-agenda. This also brings a great lightness and openness, a complete acceptance and openness, acceptance of everything and everyone. And it brings one naturally in accord, in line with the vows. This one thing, if we do it, make sure that we are in line with all of those other vows.
Yeah. That Shambat Tindijita Kanji Rimba Jindua Monsen Molam Sudulea, Monsen Tamjajan Lea, Jusem Lea, Munju Chichardulia, Rimba Jidua.
Oh, contact. Okay, Monsem di Tampo Dene.
Monsen Molam Sudulea.
Molam Sudulea, yeah.
Monsen Tamjajan Lea. Ani Jusem Lea, Jusem Kambalea.
Oh, okay.
Munju Chichardulia.
Di Tama Dela Ngala Shabu.
Munju da Semkini, Jusem Nika Chichardulia.
Oh, Nyamdu.
Nyamdolea.
Oh, Lasso. And so there are four different ways that, yeah, there are four different stages in taking the vows. So there are progressive stages of taking the vows. So we can first take the aspiration bodhicitta through aspiration prayer, like we do with the opening prayers, or we can take aspiration bodhicitta with the pledge, together with a pledge. Then we can take up the pledge, the application, the vows of application bodhicitta. And then we can take the two together, both aspiration bodhicitta and application bodhicitta at the same time. So there are these different progressive ways of taking the vows.
야, ngitadi ta kundi jide.
Oh, lasso.
Oda tizo shegonna di abore. Janju semlonna janju ta jangdum lembayina sonam lab chimbu sagare. Niji ke dan tizo be gewe cholo sonam chizam sayda gawa top chrugu war. Te kebar chimbu ore, yeta kebar yore. Inan kebar yore chena maje ngepa mongo sana te kyonjirwa. 파저 저통 때도 민주야다 녀제도 민주야라 쪼쪼 오다마서나 란진진 도미야데 뱀미스베게 침보라 가서 란진진 도미야라 시라 또나 맞이나 렘바다 말레나네 말레네 야야르다.
So it would be good. So Geshe-la sent me the four, those four kind of supporting factors that if those are in play while one is breaking one of the either root or auxiliary vows that make it, complete. And it would be good for us to know that. So I will also get those out when I can. Also, if you search for them, you may find them, but I do personally give just some caution there because sometimes all kinds of crazy stuff comes up too. So I will get what Geshe-la says out to you when I can. And, it's taking the Bodhisattva vows is something very, very, very precious and very meritorious. For when we are really ready to take that step and step into that way of being, that way of life, into what we're pledging, the compassion, the virtue that is part of the path of being a bodhisattva in this world. Actually, having taken the vows, doing those things, the merit actually increases even more. So there's a difference actually in doing a good deed with the vows or without having the vows, and it is a great virtue, greater virtue when we have the vows. But we also have to exercise caution because when our missteps become greater as well. So if we take the vows and cannot uphold them, also we incur faults. And so whether it's the 18 main or 26 auxiliary vows, whatever the vows are, whichever that fall into the, any of those vows, when we have our own self-agenda and self-clinging under control, we're already guarding them. But if we can't get our own self-cherishing under control, if we're, still in, that state of working with that and it's not under control at this point, it's better not to take them than it is to take them.
전주된 초가 안 돔돼 버려. 서로가 니마다 믿어. 때마다 배 장사는 배 초가 빼린 버려. 서로가 죽은 달사만 숨지 열에. 열에 장사는 배 이게 봐요래. 넘바 중 배 이게 봐요래.
So in the way of the Bodhisattva, you can see that the vows are very concise, contained within just 2 verses, 8 lines, but within this is a particular text that there's another text that has the rituals of a more formal bestowal of the Bodhisattva vows that has many, many verses. It's very long.
아니 징도 세야다 가와 고미야래 저저 가와 고미야 시다데 All pe mangbudo. Then Karen and Digo, Takibari Mare.
Di ola, di dompagi,
Dombe all the
dombexi
Chadang
ola.
Gawomyari. Odape Chadang, the Pem, Kare Zington and Diore.
Yeah. So the following verses after, in this book, it's 23 and 24, which are taking up the vows. The preceding verses, it's very celebratory and rejoicing. And those are the verses I think that Geshe-la was speaking about earlier also, to refer to at times then that you would want to be uplifted. So verses 25 through, at least my chapter ends on 34. Many verses here that whatever resonates with you to be uplifting, memorize that, bring it to mind, help you stay inspired on your path as a bodhisattva. And also His Holiness, this is particular, the last verse number 34, is something that you hear His Holiness referred to over and over again. And so within the sight of all protectors, I summon every being, calling them to Buddhahood, and until that state is reached, to every earthly joy, and make gods and demigods and all the rest rejoice. And this is something, if you listen to His Holiness's teachings or recordings of his teachings when it comes to the vows and so forth, or Bodhichitta, he recites again and again. Today my life has given fruit to this human state, has now been well assumed. Today I take my birth in Buddha's line and have become the Buddha's child and heir, and so on. This I will in every way undertake activities benefiting with such rank, and I will do no act to mar or compromise. And so also, another verse that comes up, again and again, I think those are the ones that, that Geshe-la just recited. And in any case, he said, whichever among these is inspirational to you, those are the ones to really memorize, so that you can bring them for spiritual upliftment, lift you back, remind you about being a bodhisattva and all that entails. Oh, okay, yeah. Ngala ani.
Yeah.
Okay, so Geshe-la will also send me a nice little 7 branch offering prayer that would be, he thinks he'll kind of custom make and send to me and get out to everyone, so that you can also have the 7 branch prayer. And this is something that is short and you can memorize, always have with you.
Oh yeah, Teni.
Okay, so maybe we'll finish and stop here for today.
Kanje Tengdune susu nam lene da kange yomarde. Tengi tune chandom nam lene zuba tengi tune. Katu lene digore.
Oh, lasso.
Geshe-la.
So
Gong Dak, Geshe-la, Diane, the 7 limb prayer, can we have it in Tibetan language as well?
Sure. Proyecto ne yang ani tangnang roches.
Oh, yeah.
You mean in the Tibetan letters or in like English letters, like phonetics?
In Tibetan letters.
Okay, I did. I asked Geshe-la said yes, he would say.
Yeah, Bayit. Tujinang.
So, and then lastly, what did Geshe-la Kerang Tama Tama de Kari Sumpe? One that.
장금 수수이 끝이나 레는 디그레스.
Really. So Geshe-la would like to remind you all here that it is also okay for you individually, by yourself, you know, individually take the Bodhisattva vows. This is not something that you need to do from someone else, have bestowed upon you. You can pledge to here, you know, henceforth go about in the way of a bodhisattva and be a bodhisattva. This is something you can do yourself.
Yeah. 다 드린 사르지. 주둔바 진도지기도 다.
So we'll finish here. It's getting late, Geshe-la said. Almost 7 o'clock.
두드 제가 진도지기도.
Oh, almost 6:30.
장조 삼조 림보체 마게 빠나게 규르지 겨와냠바 메바얌 코네 콘도 배워서 가리라베 고이 진간다 벤다데와 말린 제레제원 든진갸소이 자베시테 바도 생규르지 잠발 파웨 칠트르kem 군도 잠보테 안테진테 다 군지수 달로지 배완데다 rabdungo to sumshepe gyawa tamche gengo kanga chotung lajenge tawan de kunja zampo chechi rabdungo warayi.
Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it has not been born, may it arise. Where it has been born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. In the land encircled by snow-white mountains, the source of all happiness and benefit flows in your person, Chenrezig. Tenzin Gyatso remain until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri attained omniscience and Samantabhadra too, so now I dedicate these merits to train and follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future praise dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate these my roots, these sources of my merit for all beings to perfect good action.
Okay. Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you.